Dear brothers and sisters, as we look at our life, we find we are interacting with many people, members of a family, people in our neighborhoods, people in our school, if we are going to school, or in our places of work. And then as we travel, and this is an age where travel has become much easier, so people are traveling from one place to another, whether it be in the same country or other countries, you run into many people. And as you interact with people, you start to judge them. And then the more you interact with someone, the more you know someone, you try to understand what kind of a personality they have. And many times, if you've known someone for a while, all of a sudden you see that their behavior has changed. And you say, oh, you don't look like your own self. A person might be someone who's one who doesn't talk too much, and all of a sudden they start to talk a lot. Or someone who talks a lot and all of a sudden they don't want to talk. And so you tell them, you should be your own self. And as we start to look at our relationships, and as we start to think about when we tell someone to be their own self, what is it that we are expecting of them? And generally, whatever our interaction has been with them, those are the expectations that we have. And so we want them to be behaving in a manner in which they have behaved always. And as something happens with a change, we wonder why they've changed. And so we want them to be in their original state. Now, as we start to think about that, and as we start to look at our spiritual side, we all know that we can interact with the Lord, that we can interact with God. And our interactions with God generally are very, very minimal. Our attention in the world is so much that the time to interact with God seems to slip away. Our intentions might be good, but our actions are such that those interactions that we should be having are not panning out in our lives. And so when we start to look at life itself, and we start to look at how we are living our life, and we start to dig deep into how our life should be lived, many of us, when we look back, we feel that we should have lived in a manner which was different than how we spent our life. There's a great writer, I think he was from England, George Bernard Shaw. He was one who was very well known in writing. And so he got to meet the intellectuals of the time. He would interview them and all the people who were in power. And he was very close to them, and many of them he knew them well and was on a first-name basis. So in the later part of his life, George Bernard Shaw was being interviewed himself. And so the interviewer asked him a very interesting question. He said, in your life you met all kinds of people. You met a great artist, you met a great humanitarian, you met intellectual people, you met all kinds of people. So if you were to live your life again, which one would you choose? And he gave a very interesting answer. He said, I would like my life to be of George Bernard Shaw, as it could be lived. and not as he lived it. We all have good intentions. We all, in our own system, think of ways and means by which we should be leading our lives. But then we find that things that we think should be happening do not happen. And we wonder why. We need to be focused in one direction. We need to be clear about what our goal is. We need to be clear about how can we get to our goals. We need to understand that it takes attention and focus to be able to get there. And as we start to look at our own lives, many of us think of ourselves in many, many different ways. If you ask someone who you are, many people will first give their name. A name which was given to them either by their parents or whosoever gave them the name, and that stands with them. And then if you ask them any further, the next thing they talk about is the faith or the religion that they belong to, because that's very close to each and every one of us. And then they would talk about their profession, as to the profession or the activity that they do all day long. And they won't go further than that. And what we have labeled ourselves with are all the labels that we've given to ourselves, either label given to us by our parents or the profession that we went in or the faith that we belong to. And little do we realize that these are all labels which are on the outside. It's just like when you look at a coconut, if you look on the outside and you don't peel the coconut on the inside, the sweet milk of the coconut, which is on the inside, you would never be able to get to. And when we live our lives by living only on the periphery and not focused on what we truly are, then this life passes us by quickly. So saints and mystics are telling us we need to peel the layers off. We need to get to who we are. We need to get to what is our purpose in life, and we need to then take steps to get to our goals. We need to realize that we're not the body, we're not our mind, we're not our emotions. That what gives us life is our soul, our spirit, which is conscious, which is full of the love and light of God. And just like with these outer eyes we can see other objects, and with the outer ears we can hear the languages, the sounds of this world, on the inside our soul can be experienced if we know how to experience them. The Lord, who has created all creation, is accessible to each and every one of us. It is not only the domain of the saints or the seers or the yogis or the mystics to experience God. Sant Rajinder Singh Ji Maharaj would often say, he would say, what one man can do, so can another. That each and every one of us can experience God. We can be one with God, and each and every one of us has a birthright to know God. And the purpose for which we've come into this world is to be able to have our soul commune with the Lord. Now, how do we do it? Even if we understand it, even if we feel that this is what it is, how does one get to that state where we can experience God? That's where our inner eye and our inner ear need to be open. And what is very interesting is, when you read the scriptures, if you read the scriptures the east or the west or one faith or another, there's something which is very, very common in all of them. they all say that those who love are the ones who find God. Those who have a passion within themselves to love God are the ones who will find God. And that passion to know God is something that comes from within. It's not something that can be taught. It's not something that you can go out and buy. It has to come from within. And that happens when we start to realize who we are. Just like people who on the outside change and your friends say, you be yourself, we need to be ourselves. And our true self is our soul. So we need to recognize that. And then as we recognize ourselves at that conscious level, we'll find that love will automatically start to ooze out of us. And once we experience the love of the Lord in our being, then that love is so tremendous that all of our attention then goes in that direction. A Sufi mystic has explained very beautifully. He said, love of God is like remembering God. And when you are in love, then you try to inculcate in yourselves all the attributes of the beloved. Because you want to be like the beloved, you want your attention to be on the beloved. And so no other thought comes to you except for that. And it is in that state that activities on the outside are not going to be able to derail you from your goal. What happens in our life generally is that there is so much commotion in the world outside, and our attention is so dispersed in the activities of the world outside that we are derailed from where we should be going. And what is beautiful about remembering God is that needs to be continuous. If you start to look at the word remember, so if you think about remember, that means you forgot something and now you're remembering it. So we need to be in a state where we don't forget. And so you re-remember, or you be in a continuous state of remembrance of God, then the attributes which are godly, the attributes of non-violence, the attribute of compassion, the attribute of truth, the attribute of selfless service, all of these attributes will automatically start to flow in our being when our attention is on God. And when you look back at history, you find that since God has not been seen or heard by these outer eyes and outer ears, people have been trying to find God through the help of a guide or a saint or a mystic or someone who's one with God. It is we who get so enamored with the objects of this world that all of our attention goes there. It is not that God doesn't love us, it's not that God doesn't want us to be with God. But we who are so enamored by God's gifts have forgotten God, and we live with our attention towards the world. And so saints and mystics are always trying to encourage us to go back to God. When you look at their lives, and many of them came, in the East, many of them came in the West, many came in all paths and all times. Their sole purpose is to ignite a passion in us to know God. Their sole purpose is that we do not forget why we came into this world. They all wanted us to know that we can be with God. And this is why many a time this example about a moth and a flame is given. that the moth is always running to the flame, and the moth gets into the flame and then becomes one with the flame. And that's how our life should be. We should realize that all enlightenment comes from the Lord. The realization of who we are is going to happen with God's grace. For that, we need to dive into that light. We need to not use our intellect and worry about what's going to happen. That's how the mind keeps us away from getting to our goals. Once we realize what our goal is, then just like the moth gets into the flame, it doesn't worry about what's going to happen to the flame, and then becomes one with the flame. Then as our attention on God intensifies and as the focus on God is stronger and stronger and stronger, then we will definitely be able to get there. The love of the Lord is so tremendous that each and every one of us can get there. Like in the light, many moths can go. It's not like the light is only available to one moth and not to another moth. So the Lord is available to each and every one of us. And what is very interesting is that when we look at the spiritual arena, and when we look at the lives of the great saints and mystics, and when we see how so many people get helped by the saints and mystics, it's very interesting that each and every one of us is on a journey back to our true home. And that journey is happening for each and every one of us, but none of us knows how far we are on the journey and how far someone else is on the journey. And this is why the saints have always said that our life should be one in which we put blinders so that we focus always on our goal and we're not like distracted here or there or there. When there's a horse race, they always put blinders on the horse so the horse is running in the lane. So the horse is not distracted by what is happening with other horses or with other activities going on. So similarly, we need our focus to be on God. And that will happen when we put ethical virtues into our life, because that's like a stepping stone to spirituality. When we lead a life of love, when we put in an effort to be as we truly are. So there are no pretenses. When you meet people, you can know if they're real or they are pretending. You might not know when you meet them once or twice or 3 times, 4 times, but when you meet someone for a few times, you get to know how they are, and are they pretending, are they really like that, because you see them in different colors and different times, and then you start to see how they're what they are truthfully. And this is why many times when parents who don't do things themselves and ask their children to do them, the children are very wise. They can see through the parents. Because they not only learn from what we tell them, they also learn a lot from what they see and what they experience. And so if let's say the father in the house is smoking and drinking and tell the child, you shouldn't smoke and drink, chances are the child is going to smoke and drink anyway. Because they might have seen the parents do some things which they say he should not be doing. And so what we are, is understood by other people. And so we need to be truly what we are, and that's how we should be. And if we pass through this life without getting to our goals, then this life becomes a waste. If you believe in transmigration of the soul is transmigrating from one existence to another. There are 8.4 million of species. Many of them have a very short time life. Many of them have very long times. Like a tree could be living for hundreds of years. Yeah? There could be other species that have a very long lifespan. So you can well imagine if you have to go through all of them, and then you get another chance. How long will it take before you get another human birth? And so the saints always have been exhorting us to not miss this golden opportunity. This is a golden opportunity to know God. We all can know God because we're children of God. We all have a birthright to know God. We all have equal access to God, irrespective of whatever our sins are. Like God is not only the domain of just like one faith or one religion or one country or one type of people or another type of people. God is equally available to each and every one of us. And those who put an effort in that direction are the ones who will experience God. And those who get enamored by the attractions of this world, those who get caught in the activities of this world, are going to then pass this life without taking steps towards their goal. And so we all gather here today. It may pray to God Almighty to help each and every one of us here know and understand what is truly, truly good for us. We should know that God is there for each and every one of us. The purpose of this life is to be one with God. That oneness can be achieved by us as we focus on God. And focusing on God means to close our eyes, close our ears to the world outside, and focus our attention within. Take our attention away from the world outside and focus within, because God is not on the outside. God is within each and every one of us. And what helps in the process is to inculcate the ethical virtues and a life of selfless service. When we extend a helping hand to someone else. As the saying in Punjabi says, Hath karwal, dil yarwal. It says, our hands to our work, but our hearts to our beloved. Realizing that whatever we do in this world, our attention should be on God. As our attention is on God, then we are remembering God at all times. And as we are remembering God at all times, then we're not derailed from our goals, because then our focus remains in that direction. And I pray that God gives us all the grace that we need to get to our goals in this very lifetime. Thank you very much.